Collapse of the dollar. In 1913, a handful of parasitic bankers were granted a monopoly on the nation's currency, and shortly thereafter we had the Great Depression, and my mother's family suffered, along with millions of other families. Who benefits when the world goes into a depression? Those who have the printing press for the currency, and that is the Federal Reserve. And over the past 100 years, we have seen them crash the economy, buy up everything cheap, and then use the money to gain more power, more influence, and they crashed the economy again and bought up everything cheap. The crash of the US dollar is not a mistake. It's not an accident. It's a planned event. And like anyone with the mentality of Adolf Hitler, this handful of parasites intend to set up a totalitarian government worldwide. China and Russia have figured it out, and they're opposing it. And the headline reads, Putin targets U.S. monetary system, aims to eliminate the U.S. dollar and euro from trade, by Mike Slavo, September 1st, 2015, from the SHTF Plan website. The title suggests that it's Putin's fault. Putin is under attack just like we the people are. I counted 60 fronts in the war against us. This is an undeclared war by the Federal Reserve against we the people of the United States of America. And the object is to conquer us. I'm going to read this article because it tells you what's going on in the world and what's coming. Because the article is not about Putin. Putin is no angel. He is a communist dictator. And I have no love for Vladimir Putin or any other communist dictator like those that run China. I love the Chinese people. They are great. But I don't like communists. And they are trying to destroy capitalism by introducing socialism and fascism and calling it capitalism. Because they want us to work for slave wages. $2 a day. That's what Americans will be earning. And everyone who has $1 billion will be stripped of it, one way or another. Now listen to this article and tell me if you like what's coming. Last year, Russia began unloading massive amounts of US dollar reserves. And there's a link for support for that claim. In the month of December of 2014 alone, Putin sold some 20% of the country's U.S. treasuries, a move that further increased tensions surrounding what can only be described as economic warfare between East and West. And I will say that those who control America started it. They have a plan, an agenda, and it's world domination. And they're using our superpower status in order to achieve their goals. And if they achieve them, we will be just as much enslaved as all of the rest of the people of the planet. And so it's necessary for all of us to wake up and recognize that there are a handful of greedy parasites who intend to take over the entire world economically and politically. And they are 99% of the way there. Freezing out Russia and forcing Russia to dump the U.S. treasuries was a strong and bold move. And both China and Russia are responding. And so they are hitting China with explosions, like the one in Tianjin recently. Today is September 15th, 2015. From what I've read at ZetaTalk.com in the newsletters, nuclear war is not a possibility for anyone. And so they're using EMPs, electromagnetic pulses, to wage warfare. And I think what will probably happen is both Russia and China will target those people who have the power and control and eliminate them, because they are causing the problems for China and Russia. And the world will be much more peaceful without them. If there are 100,000 of them and they all perish, or if there are 1 million of them and they all perish, good riddance. But bombing New York City is a bad idea. And I hope that neither China nor Russia takes such action, because killing our people is not the solution. Those who have all the power and control will still have the power and control, even if New York City has been blown off the map. A lot of innocent people are going to die, as usual, when governments start getting greedy and out of control. They are out of control in respect to greed, and they're out of control in respect to foreign policy. And they've got a puppet in the White House that does whatever he's told. They installed him there, and if you think about the power that they have, they installed a foreign-born homosexual Marxist to live in our White House. That's how much power they have. And there was protest, and it went nowhere because they have just about unlimited power. Now, if Russia and China oppose this powerful force, that's to our benefit. We want them gone also. I think, based on this article, that Americans are going to find food in short supply very soon. I mean, to the point of starvation. And this is planned, and that's why they built all the FEMA camps. They know what's coming because they planned it. So the author says that Putin is dumping U.S. treasuries, has sold off 20% of their holdings. And the next paragraph says, then, as if part of a coordinated effort, this summer it was revealed that China had implemented a similar strategy, dumping $500 billion in dollar-denominated assets. Well, what would you do if you were under attack? The attack comes from the superpower. I'm not going to say we, because I had nothing to do with it. I'm not going to say we because I am not greedy. I am not parasitic. And I feel bad for those people on fixed incomes who will find a loaf of bread $100 and a day later $200. I'll continue reading. But that's just the beginning of the end for the US dollar. Amid a major meltdown in Chinese stock markets, the People's Republic, not the Communist Party's republic, but the People's Republic, sold off billions in dollar assets last week in what was reported to be an effort to stabilize their collapsing financial markets. Everything that happens was planned by this handful. They could be a million of them, but compared to 7.3 billion, they are just a handful. Maybe one out of a population of a million belongs to this parasitic group. And now, as Russia's economy collapses under the weight of American and European sanctions, including what many believe to be widespread downward manipulation of oil prices, Vladimir Putin is sending a clear signal to the central bank of the world reserve currency. A new bill drafted by the president of the Russian Federation aims to completely eliminate the US dollar from the trade of goods. Russian dictator, he's not a president, he's a dictator. He's been there far too long for any president. Russian President Vladimir Putin has drafted a bill that aims to eliminate the US dollar and the euro from trade between CIS countries. This means the creation of a single financial market between Russia, Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and other countries of the former Soviet Union. So Putin still has those countries under his thumb. And I recall him saying the breakup of the Soviet Union was a big mistake. This is a man who is communist all the way to the core. Quote, this will help expand the use of national currencies in foreign trade payments and financial services, and thus create preconditions for greater liquidity of domestic currency markets, unquote, said a statement from the Kremlin. Nobody over there is free to say what he wants. It is a communist country, and the world needs communism like it needs an outbreak of the plague. The bill would also help to facilitate trade in the region and help to achieve macroeconomic stability. Source RT. And there's a link there in case you want to verify it. The implications for such a move, though not necessarily immediate, are serious over the long term. That Russia and China are now overtly divesting themselves of US dollar assets signals a significant paradigm shift in global trade. Well, the superpower, the USA, under the dictatorial leadership of the Federal Reserve, had arranged it so that only US dollars could be used to trade oil, and that created a tremendous demand and established the dollar as the reserve currency. That is all falling apart now. What does it mean to the average American? Prices are going to double every few days with runaway inflation, and we'll get to that in a minute. The author says the dollar may be strong today as panicked global investors rush to the perceived safety of the U.S. Treasury assets. And I think that's exactly right. But as the Federal Reserve is left with no choice but to print trillions more to keep financial markets from ruin, the creditors who usually buy those assets are drying up. And I agree with that completely. There will be no end to QE. When they print dollars, prices go up. Before QE, we had a money supply of 800 billion, and they're printing $1 trillion every 3 months. And that's been going on for years. So if you think that prices are going to hold, that is incorrect. The author says there will come a breaking point in the near future. And when that day comes, we will see the largest monetary collapse in the history of the world. And he has a link. Isn't the internet great? You can write an article and link to all of your supporting ideas. When the collapse of the dollar occurs, it will literally and figuratively come like a thief in the night, and I do mean overnight, the author says. We are all familiar with the concept of inflation. which is the international byproduct of the Federal Reserve. Amen. And it's time for them to go. One way or another, they have to be driven off the planet. Nobody needs their central banks, and 187 countries have their central bank control. A central bank is a siphon hose. What does it siphon? Wealth. And this siphon hose has been established in 187 countries around the world. And people are waking up that a siphon hose is draining their wealth. You have people piling hundreds of trillions on top of hundreds of trillions. This is wrong. It's a concentration of wealth. 1% of the world owns half of the world's wealth. I read that today. I gathered up several articles and I'm reading them all. I got sleepy and went to bed. I woke up to feed the rabbits outside, the wild rabbits, and I read this article because I was awake. And I thought it was so good I wanted to read it to you all and give you the benefit. So he just accused the Federal Reserve of creating inflation. He says it's the international byproduct of the Federal Reserve. And I couldn't agree more. He says, but I'm not just talking about inflation. I'm speaking about hyperinflation, which is caused by the collapse of the value of the currency, resulting in runaway prices. Well, if they don't want our dollars, they're not going to accept dollars for goods. And that means the price of those goods will go sky high overnight. All Americans have to trade is dollars. And if nobody wants dollars anymore, it will be hard to get rid of them. You will have to pay a lot of dollars to get a little bit of goods and services. Now the part that really floored me. The author says, here are 3 examples of how quickly a currency collapse can occur when a nation's money no longer holds its value. 1. In Weimar, Germany, from 1922 to 1923, prices doubled every 3 days. I'll wait till you get up off the floor before I read number 2. In the modern era, in Yugoslavia from 1992 to 1994, Yugoslavia witnessed prices doubling every 34 hours. And if you're now up off the floor again, here's number 3, stand by. In Zimbabwe, in the 2-year period from 2007 to 2008, prices doubled every 25 hours. You know, you have to feel sad for all of those people in Congress who accepted bribes of $100 and $200 million. I'm talking about people like Al Gore, who spread the propaganda that the earth was heating up because the atmosphere was heating up because of the greenhouse effect. The atmosphere heated up 1 degree, and that was normal fluctuation. There was no global warming. I just read that ice is forming at the North Pole at a faster rate than ever before. Dr. Bill Deagle says he thinks we're entering into an ice age. This is a very learned man who has scientific reasoning like very few people on this planet. Dr. Bill Deagle treated some of the people who were exposed to nuclear material during the Oklahoma City bombing. Yes, you were told it was a fertilizer truck, but the truth is it was a nuclear bomb that killed 168 little kids. That's how ruthless these parasites are. They needed to take away the Constitution, and they needed to have some terrorist events here in the USA. And Oklahoma City bombing was one of them. And they used a military man who was trained to carry out orders. And they executed him, Timothy McVeigh. And everybody in the world thinks that he's the Lee Harvey Oswald of the Oklahoma City bombing, and they have no idea what's really going on. And they never will. I still get people arguing about who did 9/11. Some people will just never figure it out. And so all those people in Congress who accepted bribes, 100 million, 200 million, whatever, the Federal Reserve has the printing press and they could give them 500 million. It wouldn't even matter because the money would go into a Swiss bank and it would just sit there. Who is going to spend $500 million? And as the dollar goes to zero value, so does their bribe money. And there are 300 members of Congress, according to Andrew Bashago, 300 members of Congress who have a Swiss bank account. That shows you how widespread the selling out of America is. When you vote for them, you give up your vote and you let them have it. And when they have millions of votes, those votes go up for sale to the highest bidder. And the highest bidder is corporations who want legislation. They write the legislation to favor them at the expense of the people. And the members of Congress accept bribes in order to rubber stamp any bill. That's why they don't read them anymore. It isn't necessary to read them. They've already made their backroom deal. And that's what's going on in America. You're being sold out. And so you need to eliminate all representatives of the people. Let the people represent themselves, because we're not going to take a bribe to screw ourselves. We need to divorce this federal government and invalidate all of these rubber-stamped legislative bills. That's the solution. Secession is the solution. It's the peaceful solution. It ends the Fed. It ends the IRS. It ends the representative system. And that's what we need. We can make the bribery arrangement 50 times more difficult overnight when we secede. Because slavery and hyperinflation lie just ahead. That means no food for you. The author says history is replete with examples of currency collapses. And they typically follow very predictable patterns in which a nation unravels and social chaos, and many times widespread violence and even genocide become part of the national landscape. Well, these people have no problem whatsoever in killing 200 million Americans and taking over all their wealth, all their property. So many people lost their homes to banks that created the money out of thin air to lend in the first place. So the banks wind up with the homes free. It's a theft of homes by banks. And in the end, the Federal Reserve will rob all the banks. Watch and see. There is a link, what will happen when the dollar collapses? And if you want to follow that link, the URL for this article will be in the video description. And though such things could never happen in the developed world, we urge our readers to consider the reality of a scenario that involves a breakdown of the US dollar. We direct your attention to Venezuela, where we can see what a total system collapse looks like in real time, and there's a link. With 30% of Venezuelans eating 2 or fewer meals per day, social unrest is mounting rapidly in President Nicolas Maduro's socialist utopia. I think that Maduro is a puppet, installed by those who install puppets around the world. And the objective is to get control of the oil, because they've got us all on an oil addiction. There are plenty of free energy devices out there, but they have us all forced to use oil, and the food on your table travels an average of 1,500 miles, and that lavishes money on the oil companies. This food should be grown locally, and 90% of the cost eliminated. 90% of the price of an apple goes to the oil companies, because 90% of the cost of an apple is transportation costs. And people ask, why aren't farmers rich? Because all the profit goes to the oil companies, and they are rich. In Venezuela, as the Wall Street Journal reports, soldiers have now been deployed to stem rampant food smuggling and price speculation, which Maduro blames for triple-digit inflation and scarcity. It could be the communist system that Maduro is implementing there, because we know that the Soviet Union had empty shelves, and we don't want communism. We don't want them to implement communism, socialism, and fascism and try to call it capitalism so that we all hate capitalism. Don't be mind-controlled. There is a powerful entity behind all of this. Now this next part is sad. Quote, due to the shortage of food, the desperation is enormous, unquote. Local opposition politician Andres Camejo said. And nowhere is it more evident than the trampling death of an 80-year-old woman outside a state-subsidized supermarket. So you've got the government in there subsidizing food prices. They want everybody dependent on the government, so desperate for food that they trample an 80-year-old woman. Next paragraph. In such a scenario, we can fully expect that our regular systems of commerce will break down, and there's a link, to the point that essential goods like food, gas, and other critical supplies become unattainable to the masses at almost any price. But you can be sure that the parasites will have plenty of food and plenty of gasoline. And you can be sure that they will be out of reach from the angry mobs, who will probably kill our own because they're angry. And this is wrong. That's why I said earlier, if Russia and China target those who are the culprits, they would be doing us a favor. Because we can't get to them. And even if I could, I wouldn't. Because I favor secession instead. And the sooner we switch to people rule and return the Constitution to its rightful place, the better off we'll be, the fewer deaths in our state. And the governors should understand that, but they don't, apparently. Bribery money is just too powerful a force for them to resist. Tess Pennington, author of The Prepper's Blueprint, explains what happens within 3 to 5 days of the reality of the monetary disaster setting in. Have you ever heard the saying, we are 3 days from anarchy? By the way, there's a link to the Prepper's Blueprint. It seems like that might be a good publication to read at times like these. "We are 3 days away from anarchy," is a quote. In the wake of a disaster, that's all you have is 3 days to turn the crazy train around before crime, looting, and chaos ensue. And I think that in between the lines here I'm reading, we better stock up on canned goods because it might be the only thing we have to eat. In reports during the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, residents from Staten Island were pleading for help from elected officials begging for gasoline, food, and clothing. Well, if the parasites deem that you're not getting any gasoline, food, or clothing, then the elected official puppets are not going to give you any. Multiple factors contribute to societal breakdowns, including failure of adequate government response, population density, citizens taking advantage of the grid being down, and overwhelmed emergency response teams. And grid being down has a link. I guess you can read what happens when the grid goes down. I already know. No electricity, no water, no food, no air conditioning, no heater, and without gasoline and diesel, there will be no food delivered to your grocery stores. What is in the grocery stores will vanish in hours, and it might be a good idea to stock up now. The author says the 3 to 5 days following a disaster is the bewitching hour. During this short amount of time, the population slowly becomes a powder keg full of angry, desperate citizens. Yes, when you need a drink of water, you can become quite desperate in no time. We can live 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, and 3 minutes without air. A good example is the chaos that ensued in New Orleans following the absence of action from the local government or a timely, effective federal response in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Now, I want to tell you one thing about Hurricane Katrina. It was contrived. They caused Hurricane Katrina with their weather modification apparatus. They wanted to do a test to find out if people would allow the stripping of their guns. And they found that people went along with that in a time of emergency, they do whatever they're told. And so there are going to be a lot of emergencies in the future because they want to take the guns away. The author says in such troubled times, people were forced to fend for themselves and their families by any means necessary. When they defended with guns, their guns were taken away. The author says this timeline of Hurricane Katrina, and he's got a link to the timeline, this timeline of Hurricane Katrina effectively illustrates the breakdown. And within 3 days, the citizens of New Orleans descended into anarchy, looting, and murder. Well, anarchy is not such a bad thing, but not at a time of looting and murder. Anarchy means no government. And in the case of Katrina, no government would have been much better because the government made things worse. FEMA is supposed to rush in and help everybody, and there were a lot of complaints coming from those so-called elected officials about FEMA, if you recall. I remember it well, and I don't have a television. I don't watch things on the television. I have only a computer, and I get everything from the internet. And I see TVs being given away every day, and I don't want them. Some of them are large screen, in perfect working condition sometimes. Usually they have a problem. The author says it is difficult to imagine a sustained breakdown across America. Well, only in big cities you find high-density population. 94% of America is vacant land. And with hydroponics, the demand for tillable soil is lifted. Last paragraph, but make no mistake, should the US dollar ever come under attack, and it appears that the opening salvos have already been fired in all bold text by Russia and China. No, the opening salvos were fired by the parasites. They waged war against Russia and China. And China and Russia are responding, that's all. They recognize that there is one superpower, and they're watching that superpower vigilantly. This author thinks that the opening salvos were fired by Russia and China. I think the response of the opening salvos that were fired by the Federal Reserve and the parasites and the fascists and the large corporations, they are the ones that want to take over the world. But to finish his sentence, the opening salvos have already been fired by Russia and China, then life as we have come to know it in America will come to a drastic and near immediate halt. Well, Jim Willey said that we're going to be a third world nation, and I think he's right. And it's the greed of the parasites that took us there. Thanks for watching. See you next time. The coming collapse of the dollar. In 1913, a handful of parasitic bankers were granted a monopoly on the nation's currency. And shortly thereafter, we had the Great Depression, and my mother's family suffered, along with millions of other families. Who benefits when the world goes into a depression? Those who have the printing press for the currency, and that is the Federal Reserve. And over the past 100 years, we have seen them crash the economy, buy up everything cheap, and then use the money to gain more power, more influence, and they crashed the economy again and bought up everything cheap. The crash of the US dollar is not a mistake. It's not an accident. It's a planned event. And like anyone with the mentality of Adolf Hitler, this handful of parasites intend to set up a totalitarian government worldwide. China and Russia have figured it out, and they're opposing it. And the headline reads, Putin targets U.S. monetary system, aims to eliminate the U.S. dollar and euro from trade, by Mike Slavo, September 1st, 2015, from the SHTF Plan website. The title suggests that it's Putin's fault. Putin is under attack just like we the people are. I counted 60 fronts in the war against us. This is an undeclared war by the Federal Reserve against we the people of the United States of America. And the object is to conquer us. I'm going to read this article because it tells you what's going on in the world and what's coming. Because the article is not about Putin. Putin is no angel. He is a communist dictator. And I have no love for Vladimir Putin or any other communist dictator like those that run China. I love the Chinese people. They are great. But I don't like communists. And they are trying to destroy capitalism by introducing socialism and fascism and calling it capitalism. Because they want us to work for slave wages. $2 a day. That's what Americans will be earning. And everyone who has $1 billion will be stripped of it, one way or another. Now listen to this article and tell me if you like what's coming. Last year, Russia began unloading massive amounts of US dollar reserves. And there's a link for support for that claim. In the month of December of 2014 alone, Putin sold some 20% of the country's U.S. treasuries, a move that further increased tensions surrounding what can only be described as economic warfare between East and West. And I will say that those who control America started it. They have a plan, an agenda, and it's world domination. And they're using our superpower status in order to achieve their goals. And if they achieve them, we will be just as much enslaved as all of the rest of the people of the planet. And so it's necessary for all of us to wake up and recognize that there are a handful of greedy parasites who intend to take over the entire world economically and politically. And they are 99% of the way there. Freezing out Russia and forcing Russia to dump the U.S. treasuries was a strong and bold move. And both China and Russia are responding. And so they are hitting China with explosions like the one in Tianjin recently. Today is September 15th, 2015. From what I've read at ZetaTalk.com in the newsletters, nuclear war is not a possibility for anyone. And so they're using EMP